Welcome. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on a hidden force that, honestly, runs our entire economy. And no, it's not interest rates, it's not supply chains, it's something much more human. It's the stories we tell ourselves. So let's get into it.
You know, we're all taught that economics is this cold, hard science, right? It's all about data points, rational choices, and spreadsheets. But what if that's not the whole picture? What if the biggest booms and the most devastating busts, the moments that change everything, are actually driven by, well, by drama, by the contagious viral stories we all start telling about what's going to happen next?
So the key idea we're going to unpack here is something economists call perennial economic narratives. And the best way to think about them is the picture of virus. Seriously, they're these contagious ideas that spread from person to person, infecting our decisions about whether to spend, to save, or to invest. And just like a real virus, they mutate over time, but their core DNA, that stays the same.
And here's where it gets really interesting. We can actually categorize these economic stories, kind of like how a folklorist classifies myths and legends. By spotting the recurring plots, the heroes, the villains, we can start to see the patterns. We can begin to understand why the same basic economic fears and manias seem to pop up again and again, generation after generation.
All right, let's start with a big one. A story that isn't just decades or centuries old. We're talking thousands of years old. The deep-seated fear that new technology will make humans totally obsolete. This fear of being replaced by a machine, it's not a new thing. It is ancient. Just look at this timeline. It goes all the way back to the 7th century BC, with Homer writing about self-moving tripods. Then you have Aristotle, 350 BC, imagining shuttles that could weave all by themselves. Fast forward and you get the Luddites physically smashing the machines. Then in the 1930s, the fear gets a fancy name, technological unemployment. And today? Well, today we just call it AI. The technology keeps changing, but that fundamental anxiety, it's identical.
I mean, just stop and think about this quote from Aristotle for a second. It's staggering. We're talking over 2,000 years ago, and he's not just predicting factory automation with that self-weaving shuttle. With the self-playing lyre, he's basically imagining a player piano, or maybe even Spotify. He saw the logical endgame of technology, a world where our entire concept of work gets turned upside down.
Now this story, this narrative, it reached an absolute fever pitch in the 1930s. It got so contagious, so powerful, that even Albert Einstein was convinced. Yes, that Albert Einstein. He argued that technology had gotten so efficient that it eliminated too many jobs and people just couldn't afford to buy anything. And when a story like that takes hold, it dramatically changes how people behave. They stop spending, they hoard money, and that fear can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, making the economic situation even worse.
Okay, time for our second narrative. This one shows us that sometimes the story is the currency. Let's dig into how the tale told about money can be way more valuable than the actual technology behind it.
At first glance, you might think, what does a debate about backing the dollar with silver in the 1890s have to do with Bitcoin? They seem like they're from different planets. But if you look past the technology and focus on the story, they're practically twins. Bimetallism was sold as a populist revolt of regular people against the big banks. Bitcoin? It was sold as a populist revolt against big government and big banks. The emotional engine, that story of rebellion, is exactly the same.
So the huge takeaway here is that Bitcoin's success wasn't just about clever code. It was about a perfectly crafted, incredibly contagious story. Think about all the elements. You've got the mysterious, almost mythical founder in Satoshi Nakamoto. You have that built-in resentment against the establishment. And you have this powerful idea of a new global identity for people who grew up on the internet. That's a story that's almost impossible to resist.
All right, for our final case study, let's look at the ultimate storytelling machine, the stock market. Because when you're in the market, you're not really investing in a company's balance sheet. You're investing in what you think everybody else thinks about that company. It's a story about a story.
The brilliant economist John Maynard Keynes came up with the perfect analogy for this. He compared the stock market to one of those old newspaper beauty contests. To win, you don't pick the face that you personally find the most attractive. Nope, you win by picking the face that you think most other people are going to pick. It's a second-guessing game. You're not analyzing fundamentals. You're trying to analyze the psychology of the crowd.
And there is no better, or maybe I should say, scarier example of this than Black Monday, 1987. That crash didn't just happen out of nowhere.
A very specific and very terrifying story started to build in the days right before it. A story that made everybody start guessing what everybody else was about to do. The seed of the idea was planted. Just a few days before the crash, the Wall Street Journal, the paper of record for investors, publishes this story. It warns that new computer trading programs could start a huge slide that feeds on itself. Suddenly, that idea is out there. Every investor is reading it, and every investor is thinking, uh-oh, everyone else just read this too. Are they getting ready to sell? And then came the visual trigger, the knockout punch. On the morning of October 19th, this chart appeared in newspapers all over the country. It visually screamed that the 1987 market was perfectly tracking the 1929 market right before the Great Crash. Now, it didn't matter if the comparison was fair or not. All that mattered was that everyone saw it and knew that everyone else was seeing it too. The beauty contest was on, and the consensus was deafening. A crash is coming. Get out now.
And the result was immediate and absolutely catastrophic. The S&P 500 dropped over 22% in a single day. Think about that. This wasn't a reaction to a war or a natural disaster or some big economic report. It was a reaction to a story, a simple, terrifying story that went viral and caused a panic. So, we've looked at how these powerful stories have shaped the past. But let's bring it home. The really important question is, how are they shaping our lives right here, right now?
What we've seen in all these examples is this incredibly powerful feedback loop. A story gets started, maybe about job-stealing robots or a looming recession. That story changes how people actually behave with their money. And then, the market's reaction, like a big sell-off, seems to prove the original story was right all along, which just makes the story even stronger and more contagious. It's a cycle.
And that brings us to the most critical question of all. This isn't just a history lesson. These narratives are swirling all around us every single day, influencing our choices. So, the question you've got to ask yourself is, what economic story are you living in?
Think about the big stories we live by today. The promise of the American dream, the constant fear of missing out, FOMO, that drives so much investment. That old fear of technological unemployment is back, bigger than ever, the rise of the machines, the national debt crisis. These are the invisible currents pulling our economy in one direction or another. And the first step to navigating them is to simply see them for what they are: powerful, pervasive, and deeply human stories. Thanks for watching.